Thank everybody for being a part of this session. This is our first empathy panel. I apologize for the slight delay, but we'll make it work. The first empathy panel that we have is, of course, not without a very esteemed panel of gentlemen and a young lady that we will be fortunate to have their input as it relates to issues regarding social unrest and issues within the African American community, especially as it is Black History Month, and we want to make sure that we address those issues directly and tie those issues to empathy, how people receive empathy, how people express empathy, how people recognize situations that are full of empathy and void of it. And to that end, I would like to begin by introducing our esteemed panel. And first is Dr. Barbara Shabazz. She is currently a psychology program director, author of Intentional Balance. She's the owner, founder, and CIO of Intentional Activities. And for over 25 years, she has served students, clients, and the larger community as an instructor, advisor, speaker, consultant, therapist, and coach. We are so fortunate to have you, Dr. Shabazz. We thank you and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Next on the panel, we have one of TCC's very own. He is, here with degrees in education, psychology, and marriage and family therapy, taking on a host of roles as a teacher, guidance officer, department manager, motivational speaker, and counselor. With service to this institution spanning 14 years, we welcome Mr. Chapman. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel, sir.
Thank you.
And finally, last but not least, another one of our very own, with roles here at TCC as a Veterans Affairs counselor and coordinator, academic counselor, dean of student support services, Virginia Beach and the Norfolk campus, director of military student support services, interim provost and CAO for the Norfolk campus, and currently serving as the dean of student services here at the Norfolk campus. With service to this institution spanning over 17 years, we welcome Dean Chestnut. Thank you for being a part of this panel.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I will start with you, Dr. Shabazz, if you will. The first question that the students had, I wanted to pose to you, if you would be so willing. How do you personally balance the idea of being self-serving and selfless, particularly as it relates to questions on empathy?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Because I do value living based on the principles of servant leadership, it's not hard for me to want to listen, empathize, heal, and raise awareness. Although it's rare for me to question whether my motivations are coming from a genuine place, it's common for me to sometimes have to take a closer look at whether I'm being too selfless and need to fill my cup so I'm not pouring from an empty one. But I do believe that to whom much is given, much is required, ... with boundaries.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question that I have, I will pose to you, Mr. Chapman, and it is, what are your personal biases that most interfere with finding truth about things?
I would have to say that my emotions and feelings are the things that cloud my view and cause me not to actually get to the core of an issue or the actual issue at hand. So if my emotions are raw, if they're not in check, then I will have an inability to actually see what's going on. So my emotions and my feelings are are the things that skew my judgment typically.
Thank you. I would imagine that especially as it relates to empathy, those are things to be aware of and mindful of to make sure that those things aren't clouding your path.
Yes.
I appreciate that. Dr. Shabazz, another question for you. Do you believe that trauma can be something that enhances or inhibits empathy?
When we're able to understand what someone's going through because we've been through it ourselves, we can be activated or triggered initially, but our ability to empathize can also be enhanced. On the other hand, some can be so hardened by the trauma that they've experienced that their ability to feel into or kind of be with the person can be impaired because it would require them to deconstruct the guardrails that they've put up to make themselves feel safe and be re-traumatized. So it can enhance it and it can also impair it.
Thank you so much for that.
Of course.
It's truly interesting. Mr. Chapman, I would ask you, do you feel like people can be more empathetic to others than they are to themselves? Or do you think that sometimes even people can be less empathetic to others than they are to themselves?
Yes, I think it's either yes to both of those. So in terms of being more empathetic to others than you are to yourself, let's say you have low self-esteem, poor self-concept, or you're just overly selfless, then you could really put your needs above others to the point where you're not at your best. And then on the flip side, of course, when you are less empathetic towards others, it's easy to do that when you sort of what we call empathy bias. So you are empathetic to those people that are in your circle, and for everyone outside of your circle, you find it hard to show that same level of empathy. So that's sort of how that works.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. Thank you for that. Dr. Shabazz, do you think society is embracing more extreme stances on these social issues? Do you think that's a good idea, or do you think there should be more of a connection to nuance as it relates to these social issues?
We're always going to have extremes, outliers, exceptions to anything. But it is a hopeful occurrence that we see now in the larger fraction of society that we see people wanting and valuing truth more. People are tired of being lied to. The definition of nuance is that subtle difference, right? So subtle that we might sometimes miss it. So that's why dialogue like this is important, because we need to be able to get together to ask the questions, to tease out the nuances. You all have probably seen that meme between two women that, one woman is saying, we could disagree and still be friends. And then the other woman who's sitting with her and having lunch says yes, and then explicative about pizza topping, not about racism, for instance. So we can have some nuance, but we also have to acknowledge truths. And I'm a huge believer in the both and. And so we don't always have to have the either or. We can emphasize both and. More than one thing can be true in different instances.
I appreciate that. I guess, and I don't mean to throw you a wild card here, but in light of what you just said, when do you think it would be appropriate to differentiate between the point where, all right, in this situation of nuance, more education is required versus in this nuanced situation where that lack of understanding is taking place, maybe a little bit of distance is required. Like maybe I need to separate myself.
Sure. I think that effort and willingness are two big words that come up for me when you ask that question. Because if someone's willing to learn and they're just, ignorant about certain facts, then that's a wonderful starting point. But if, the person is just blissfully ignorant and isn't really wanting to understand, then that's where we need to know where and how to set boundaries. And
I'm
and
great.
maybe plant those seeds, and then hopefully the person can come back at a later time when they might, want to dialogue more.
I'm grateful for that statement, especially in light of what I neglected to present initially as the definition of empathy. And what I found was that it was defined as the action of understanding, being aware of, and being sensitive to the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of others. And like you said, if you're not willing to be informed, if you're not willing to be educated, if you choose to be blissfully ignorant, then your ability to be empathetic is grossly hindered in that stance, right? So that makes good sense. Thank you so much for that. Um, Mr. Chapman, I would ask you another question from the students. How does someone show empathy in light of what we were just saying? How does someone show empathy to someone who doesn't share their beliefs? How do you think that happens?
Well, I'll start with a statement in that how we get to the place where we can show empathy is that we see everyone as equal. So part of the issue with empathy is we see people as being different. So start with the premise that everyone is equal, and then you start with listening and embracing and sharing. But I think the most important thing here is that we see everyone as equal, because when we do, that allows us to sort of release some of those biases. And I think what we see in this country is when people have biases because they see someone's difference as a negative, that's when the destructive and dangerous behavior ensues, and we have some of the problems that we have today and that we've had in years gone by.
I'm grateful for that. So recognizing each other as equals, and at least starting from that as a foundational standpoint of discord, is important. Yes. to the purpose and the outcome of the actual dialogue. And I agree, if you don't start from that standpoint, you're probably starting at a place that's not destined for success.
Exactly.
I appreciate that. Dr. Shabazz, my last question to you from the students that I have is, do you believe that someone can exercise empathy while imposing their beliefs on someone else?
Not truly, not genuinely. Empathy is about listening. And so the person we're attempting to hear doesn't necessarily need to know how we feel. There's a time and there's a place for that. But in that moment, when you're really trying to understand what someone is saying, where they are, that's really not the most useful thing to do. We really should never impose our beliefs on anyone in any situation. However, for the purposes of what we're talking about here, if they do ask us to share, then of course that's feasible. But if not, they probably just want you to listen and lend an ear to them more than anything else. Empathy does require a bit of, we've probably heard the term emotional intelligence, which is our capacity to be aware of, control, and express our emotions. So we have to be self-aware. We have to know how to self-regulate. We have to understand our motivations. And it does require some social skills. So some people are a little bit better than others, but if we just all listen, which is not a hard thing to do, shouldn't be a hard thing to do, we can't go wrong.
I completely agree and understand and agree and recognize that. do you think that in our current climate of social unrest, the idea of being attentive to and listening to others is complicated in these situations? And how do you achieve it even in the midst of everything that's happening? Like,
Sure, it is hard to achieve for many, but we have to think about our current climate in this way. This is the way I always talk to my students in understanding this. The way we do one thing is the way that we do all the things, right? So if we take race out of it in this discussion that's already a hot discussion, if someone is used to not really being a great listener, in other conversations, this is not the time that they're going to, become this wonderful listener, because they're dealing with their own internal stuff, and ego can be a big part of it as well. So if we have a desire to be right and to be perfect in other areas of our life, then we're going to bring those same traits to this conversation.
I appreciate that. I thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Mr. Chapman, I'll ask you, to that point, what role do you feel, if any, do politics have regarding empathy?
Politics, just as differences play a role in how we view differences. So you have two political views with, Republican, Democrat. So, and I think we saw that recently and we see it today, where one side sees the other side as being evil, bad, ugly, and the list goes on. So then all empathy shuts down. So I think we saw a lot of that, and we're seeing a lot of that with the political parties. Everything is politicized. So I think politics do play an important role in empathy, just as I spoke earlier about when we see people as being different, whether it's politically speaking or just about human, being a human. If we see people as being fundamentally different, then that is where issues start.
Do you feel like there's a point in time in dialogue, especially if it revolves around political issues or social issues, that maybe it's a time, in conscious recognition of being empathetic, to kind of step back or withdraw from certain conversations that you feel may not be fruitful? Or do you feel like maybe that's a time to press in? Just speaking to that point further and asking about that.
I think the time is all right. The time is always right to have a meaningful, important conversation. However, because people's emotions are high when it comes to politics and other issues, you must approach those conversations gingerly, because you wouldn't want to go down that road and it just blows up. And I think, clearly, if you're not equipped and your emotions are not in a good place, then it is wise to withdraw from the conversation. But if you are evolved, you're aware of your own biases and your own emotions, then yes, do engage in that conversation. But a lot of people are not evolved to the point where they can have a rational, intelligent, adult conversation about opposing views. So yeah, I think it's important to have them if you can have them. But as we looked at some of the issues that happened around the most recent election, a lot of people were not prepared to have intelligent dialogue because of their emotions and their feelings, not the facts, but it was just highly emotional.
I appreciate that. Dr. Shabazz, I'll ask you, especially as it relates to those feelings and emotions, do you feel like it's okay to be transparent about maybe some of your shortcomings, or maybe some of the areas in which you may feel like you have some bias, especially in dialogue, in an effort to be empathetic, or do you feel like maybe keeping those to yourself is important in the interest of dialogue?
Yeah, that is, we have to, along with practicing that active listening that we talked about, we have to be vulnerable. Our ability to be present with the feelings that other people are expressing and their needs they're expressing in that very moment is important, but also we have to remove our own masks and reveal our feelings to each other. Those things are vital to creating that empathetic bond.
Wow, I'm so
Yeah,
grateful.
definitely vulnerability.
Wow, I guess if you encountered a situation where somebody mismanages or misuses your vulnerability, I guess that would be an indicator maybe that's the discussion to withdraw from or not want to engage in further if you feel like it's not producing effective dialogue and maybe somebody is mismanaging your transparency.
For sure. While I do believe that comfort is canceled, like we've heard people, I also don't believe that people should be allowed to be intentionally harmful. And I think that people need to be called out on that when they are, and just told this is something that we're not going to be able to tolerate. So people can bring their vulnerabilities, but you've all heard hurt people hurt people. And when their stuff spills over into dialogue, that's not really fruitful if you're trying to heal and repair fissures.
Understand. We have a lot of comments in the chat, and it looks like a lot of affirmations from everything that's been said. And I am grateful for people who have contributed in the chat discussions. And I just want to highlight them before we move forward. Dr. Shabazz, powerful statements, excellent points, Dr. Shabazz, well put, Dr. Chapman. Treading with these conversations with delicacy and understanding is important. It was a comment that says, I think we lack understanding of what it means to engage in dialogue. To the point stated today, it is a versus situation instead of one rooted in really wanting to hear a different perspective and seeking first to understand. We must engage carefully. And so I'm grateful even for the comments that I'm seeing in the chat. And I'm so thankful for this dialogue and discussion to the degree that it serves as a benefit to our students in the greater community to have these dialogues, to have these discussions in a meaningful and fruitful and positive way. I think that only serves to make us better as a whole. And to that end, I know Dr. Chapman and Dr. Shabazz, you have prior engagements and appointments to attend to. So I don't want to ill-use your time, but I do want to thank you all again for being a part of this conversation before I turn my attention to Dean Chestnut and start posing some questions to him. Thank you both.
I'm gonna stay on for a few more minutes, and then I'm gonna support Dean Chestnut, and then I'm gonna sign off. I will leave it there by himself.
Teamwork makes the dreams work.
That's all right. Thank you, Dr. Shabazz. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Absolutely.
Take care.
You too.
All right.
Dean Chestnut, as I already said, I thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I know that you've experienced firsthand different people with different issues, and it's exercised empathy in ways, not just to people in circumstances and surroundings that I've seen, but even in relationship with me directly. So I speak with personal bias of my own, and I'm grateful to say that I know you to be someone who exercises empathy on a regular basis and looks for empathy in ways to exercise, not just for other people that you know, but even for people that you don't know. And so I'm grateful in that regard. The first question that I have for you comes from a student, and it says, what causes someone to feel like there is no empathy for them at all?
You've heard the common themes during this conversation relative to understanding and listening. We all, I think, need to consider that everyone who comes to the table, they have what we call a backstory. So understanding that life might not have been that bed of roses. Life might have accompanied trauma, high stress types of environments. So understanding that will allow us to carry on from a proactive standpoint versus a reactive standpoint, because there are triggers. I always tell our team here is that when you see persons who walk through our doors and they're upset, understand there's a backstory to that. So a person is not always who they present themselves to be based on that first judgment, if you will. They accompany their life story. So understanding the importance of empathy, understanding the importance of attempting to put yourself in the shoes of that person who you're having a conversation with is vital. But taking a moment to step back and understanding that there is that backstory as to the person who's presented to you on that day, that time, and that moment. So understanding that is vital.
I appreciate that. Do you feel like, even as it relates to that, understanding that backstory, do you feel like there may be limits to how far you can go to addressing that backstory or to addressing those issues that may lead somebody to believe that, there is no empathy for them at all? Or do you feel like that situation, I believe it's been touched on prior, do you feel like that has to be dealt with delicately?
I think looking through a delicate lens and understanding the context of the conversation is vital. So for me, and being able to address any concerns or what's presented to me, that listening lens is crucial. You can get a better understanding by just listening. I see often students and faculty and staff who I speak to, they might be in a moment, if you will, but just being able to sit there and listen to what they're trying to relate to you versus being reactive and, for lack of a better term, interrupting the conversation, you kind of have a seamless playing field because they feel that you have their best interests in mind. They feel that you can, in essence, walk in their shoes and understand what they're experiencing. So those things, I think, accompanied by, being able to hear, not just listen, but being able to hear and pay close attention to what's being relayed to you will allow that conversation to move forward. But you have to gauge that by listening to what's being pronounced to you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. More in the chat before we move forward. I see a send-off message from Dr. Shabazz thanking everybody for being here and having her, and looking forward to continuation of this conversation. I'm sure it will continue. Another comment that says intention is very important in dialogue. Listening and understanding can't truly be possible if one or both sides are only set in imposing their own beliefs. And another one, amen from the congregation for you, Dean Chestnut. Everyone has a backstory. It could be they need validation from you because they're not getting it elsewhere. It speaks to their self-esteem as well. And so, yeah, the understanding that recognizing somebody's pain, recognizing somebody's grievance that may cause them to be in a state where they believe that no one is empathetic to them, I think is crucial, and you've touched on that, and I'm grateful. The next question that I had from another student is, what role, if any, do you feel does justice have on empathy?
I think in the law, when you think of empathy, it requires to look through a different lens. Oftentimes it requires looking at what you're being presented with from a more specific lens. It requires accounting for a person's individual perspective and their life's experience. You hear people talk about racial, economic equity, and justice. The ability to understand the emotions that a person is sharing is vital. Oftentimes you hear about social research and how that plays out. But I think whenever you're dealing with the law, it can be concrete in certain perspective. But looking at empathy through a crime and policing lens, and justice empathy refers to a person's ability to understand the emotions and share the feelings of others. I think is very important. So empathy does play a role in regarding social justice, economic justice, and criminal justice.
Do you feel that that those issues as it relates to empathy, particularly connected and tied to justice, do you think it has something to do with equity, such as situations where you see somebody maybe of a different color getting a different punishment than somebody else of a different color getting for the same offense, and feeling from that not only a sense that there's a lack of justice, but also a sense that there's a lack of empathy when other people can look at those situations and feel like that's acceptable?
And again, that goes back to the backstory. I do feel when you're looking through the lens of justice, and perception comes into play a lot when you're referring to that piece. You look at TV every day and you see some of the things that on one hand you would perceive as being unjust and not just us. You would perceive treatment by, say, for example, not to pick on the policing, but how certain segments of the population are indeed treated. And it continues on. But I think looking at the root cause of all of this, because this has evolved over time. It just, this thing called social justice and criminal justice that you see today has evolved over time. Some folks might say, well, it's gotten worse. And then you hear, on the other hand, depends on that other person's backstory, that has gotten better. So it's perspective and perception, because perception is 100% of one's reality. So if person A believes it to be one way, person B might perceive it to be a different way. So, but I think tackling and having a conversation, these tough conversations that need to take place relative to the injustices or the justices that are perceived that takes place in our lives today. And it's become highlighted even more so when you look through the invention of the cell phone, being able to actually see depicted in what's going on in the world today. I'm a little older than most of you who are on the screen, but I recall watching TV back in the day, the LA riots, and we had this gentleman called Rodney King. Everybody could see on that screen that he was just abused and beaten, but again, the story was rewritten, making him out to be the enemy. So it depends on that person's perspective. It also depends on their perception relative to what do I see in my mind's eye versus what do I see from a realistic lens as truly what is occurring today. So it's important to understand that empathy, when you talk about justice, empathy plays a crucial role. And you hear oftentimes people in communities talk about folks who are policing their communities have no investment in that community. So they would feel that these people can't understand their plight, can't put themselves, take a walk in their shoes on a daily basis. So for the understanding piece, it is crucial not to judge, but take a step back and try to discern, where did this all come from? It didn't just arrive overnight, it happened over time. And then broach into the conversation, what are some of the remedies? What are some of the things that we can do to fix some of the ills of society, not just from a justice lens, but from an economic lens? Wealth gathering and wealth bearing, those things are important to be able to build up a people who might have perceived they've been oppressed over time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I did see a question about questions from the audience. Definitely, if you have any additional questions that you would like to pose, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll try to continue to turn over there and get to them as I move through the questions that I have. I have one final question, and then I wanted to turn to an opportunity to present some tools and resources and talk about opportunities for students to get access to TCC representatives and faculty here who can assist with addressing some of these concerns directly, to the degree that they need that additional dialogue and they need somebody to help them understand it. There are people around here that understand and are willing to engage with them and help in the system. To that end, my last question for you, Dean Chestnut, is what role, if any, do you feel education has regarding empathy?
To me, and I'm speaking from a biased lens because I am an educator, empathy plays a key role in the educational process and shaping outcomes and shaping mindsets and also shaping perspectives on this thing we call life. Educators, when you're in the classrooms, students sometimes view you as that authority figure, traditionally focus on the teacher lens and empathy, in which a teacher is kind of, you can use an analogy that they are indeed a counselor, because they have to use that empathetic lens to be able to understand their students and what they're going through. But again, we go back to the understanding and listening piece. We have to understand that in education, we talk about, character education programs, but we also have to accompany the capacity to listen, learn, and also understand empathy and sympathy in the use of these assets that we have, and especially these adverse times that we seem to be going through on these days. But schools and academic institutions, they too have a role, a pivotal role, as we try to move this needle forward. They have the capacity to empathize and enabling the educational environment to become comfortable, to become caring, to become compassionate, principled, and also self-discipline, I think is vital for the classroom setting and the educational arena that we use to build a better world and be able to take a step back into a positive plane and shaping the mindsets of our future, which is the students that are sitting in front of you. So as you define empathy, I would hope that everybody who's in attendance today, that they take a moment to just, digress and really breathe and capture the essence of what empathy is, and that you practice what you're hearing and what you experience in life, because you too have experiences in life that will shape your mindset, that will shape your perspective on life. But yeah, education, probably more so than most, play the biggest role when it comes to the lens called empathy that we all look through every day, through a situational or a concrete set of circumstances that we've been dealt.
I guess I would ask also, do you feel like if you serve, or if you stand as somebody who is educated, somebody who is a faculty member, or somebody who's a staff member, somebody who's given a position of authority, do you feel like they have an air of responsibility to exercise empathy above and beyond what, say, maybe a student might otherwise have?
I do, because my premise for life is that my mom always said the golden rule applies. You treat people the way that you want to be treated. And anybody who knows me, that's who I am. I am our students, and our students are me. So it gives me the ability to relay my life circumstances to them and being transparent in that, but also understanding the importance of them. We as educators, we normally would come with what we call wisdom. That's through life's experience, and the numerical prospect called age. So we've been in many of the circumstances that our students are going to go through. So we do have an obligation for advocacy, an obligation for empathy and compassion for our fellow man or our fellow woman. But again, if you start from the premise of the golden rule, I think that your trek through life will become much more easier. And even if, you have a person, I think one of the original questions was, do you feel it be a set of circumstances that you can relay your beliefs upon others? It's not so much relaying your belief, upon others. It's just that using an empathetic lens, listening to how that person feels, listening to some of the stories that they have to endure. Because I know and seeing and serving our students, because Dr. Shabazz mentioned about being a servant leader. That's who I am. I know why I exist here. I think I was placed here for a reason, and I am indeed a servant leader. I know the students are who I serve, but also my colleagues. It's not just a one trick set of circumstances. So using that as a baseline, and the way you treat people is how you'll be treated at the end of the day. And I always feel life will treat you the way you treat it. And life is not so much about us. It is about the opportunities that you take to make that difference, to be empathetic, to be compassionate, and the lesson that you learn through life, to be able to be kind and understand the importance of giving back and paying it forward. So empathy is a topic that should be at the top of our daily agenda, not just periodically. We should practice what we teach. We should practice what we teach as educators. So it's vital from my perspective.
I know Dr. Chapman touched on this earlier. The idea of being empathetic and how it's tied directly to accurate understanding, and not, understanding something that may not be accurate. Do you feel like that also ties to education, like our desire to be educated, our desire to be informed? Do you feel like that ties to the ability to be empathetic? Like, if I know more, and if I know more accurate things, if I'm more aware of things that are actually true, then I can exercise empathy in a more equitable way, maybe even to know who to be more empathetic to, or to understand where degrees of empathy may need to be proportioned out for equity's sake. Like, does that find its root in being informed and being educated as it relates to what to do and when to do it?
Yeah, I think that, go back to this educational lens, but um, education and being informed will allow you to make better decisions. It'll allow you to survey your audience, because if you don't understand the audience that's sitting or standing in front of you, you can't make those solid and very productive decisions. So everything that you stated, I wholeheartedly agree with, because for me, being from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, I was, figured I was pretty good student, went through high school, and us as, I'll use teenagers at the time, we think we know more than what we really know. So I went through life thinking I was informed relative to the origins of my people, if you will, or the origins of life. But then once you get educated, the paradigm shifts, and you are clear relative to and confident relative to what you know, and you don't have, I think somebody mentioned self-esteem. Oftentimes that too is a lack of knowledge. It's not so much a feeling type of set of circumstances, but being informed, being educated will allow you to look through a clearer lens, and what accompanies that is those benefits that you will, intake, those benefits that will allow you to believe, those benefits that will allow you to understand the importance of caring, and understand that this isn't about us. It's about, making this world we call, in the life that we live, a better place, and not just for us, but for those who will come after us. So information, education is key to this thing we call living life and living a productive life.
Awesome. I'm so grateful to you, Dean Chestnut, and to all of our esteemed panelists for the time that you guys are taking out to address these issues on behalf of our students. I did want to talk to you about the resources that are available to the students. I believe there is a CARES team initiative that I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about as a resource for our students, where they can connect with people who can continue to talk with them, find out more about their issues and address their issues. And I see that you put in the post the link for the food bank. I'll also put in the post the link for Dean Vincent Gary, who is the student life coordinator, student activities coordinator. And he definitely wanted to put his name out, put his contact information out for all students who wanted to address specific questions or have specific questions addressed. Any issues that you may have, or anybody that you know that's a part of the TCC community that wants to reach out, wants to get help, wants to get assistance, we want you to know that we're here for you, and we're here to make sure that you are on a productive path towards your success here at this institution. And I'll turn it over to you, Dean Chestnut, to talk about the CARES Team initiative and any other initiatives that you feel may be helpful in regards to understanding empathy and promoting empathy on the campus.
Again, with this topic called empathy, this topic of supporting our students, faculty, and staff, I don't know how they selected me to be responsible for the student support arena at the college, but I could not be any more thankful. So just to give you our students, faculty, and staff who are in attendance, some of the things that we're going to and planning on incorporating. We are planning on establishing a student center. It's going to be called the Student Resource and Empowerment Center, which will be a one-stop, which if a student is having concerns, let's say from a food insecurity lens, they can come to that center and get mental health referrals, all those holistic things that we talk about, Maslow's hierarchy. That'll we'll have our grand opening around mid-March, and there will be a student resource and empowerment center on each of the respective campuses. We have a food pantry called the Community Feed at MacArthur. And if you've ever visited that space, it is a one-of-a-kind space, but we wanted to have that so that you all who visit can call it your own. You can come and you know that you'll be treated with dignity and respect. It's important to us because, again, it goes back to servant leadership. So we're going to be opening a community feed at the Portsmouth campus, again, around the same time as we'll open the resource center. And we'll have a food pantry over at the Portsmouth campus, and eventually we'll branch out to the Chesapeake and the Virginia Beach campus. So all 4 campuses will be able to serve their constituent group at that campus, but it doesn't forbid you from visiting the Norfolk campus community feed or the Portsmouth campus community feed and getting the services that you need, or when it comes to the resource center, doing the same thing. So I'll place a link regarding the resources that we have at TCC. And these are a lot of external resources, but it's my responsibility that if there's a need that presents itself when it comes to our students, I'm responsible for making it happen. So you should never feel that you're in this thing alone. I'll go back to, I was once a student. Most of our faculty and staff members who are on this call was once a student. So it's important that we take care of you. I see Mr. Gary's information is in the chat. So I want to make sure you all have my information also. I'm Emmanuel Chestnut. My email address is echestnut@tcc.edu. I'll also put it in the chat. And my direct phone number is 822-1180. So let me talk about the cares team that we have. We understand that, you know, life deals us certain set of circumstances, and sometimes we're not able to navigate it. So we created a cares team led by Dean Vince Gary at the Chesapeake campus. He's the Dean of Student Life and Conduct. And we have a care team established at each of the 4 campuses. For example, I am the lead for the care team at the Norfolk campus as the campus dean. And I have, you know, 4 other team members that accompany me. So what would happen if Vince, if you could post a link in the chat when you get a chance relative to the form that, for example, if you're in a classroom and a faculty member, you have a conversation and they want to make sure that they refer you to certain resources or certain people, or if there are a set of circumstances that you just can't navigate and you need help, that professor, staff member can submit the form, and it would go to the respective campus dean, and then that team will put it in action and make sure you get the support that you need. But it's important that you know that we care. We care about you. We care about you not just from a student lens, but a professional and a personal lens. That how we get through COVID-19 and COVID fatigue and everything that accompanies that is that we collaborate and we support one another no matter what it would be. One thing I always tell my students is that, you know, never allow society and never allow circumstances to define who you're going to be, right? You should be the one to write your story. Don't let somebody else write it for you, because it might not end the way you want it to end. So grab that pen and pencil and write your own story and have that be the best story ever told, because it's vital. It's vital to you, it's vital to us, and it's vital to the bigger picture that we're trying to paint called society. The better you are, the better you'll be able to navigate, and the better society will become. But it starts with us independently and then us collectively. So for me, again, I'll make sure you guys have my contact information. I'll place it in the chat, but just know that we care about you. We have all these support systems in place to make sure that you are able to one day be appreciated, be celebrated, and be what we call graduated. That is why we come through the doors every day. I'm biased because I love a graduation. I'm a first generation graduate, so I know what that means and what that meant to shifting the paradigm of my family. My mom was the wise one, and she told me what it would mean, me being the first. It's a powerful thing. That piece of paper called a diploma that carries is light in weight, but it's heavy in perspective and progress, and as you endure and pursue your professional opportunities that will present itself to you. But just understand the importance of empathy, understand the importance of compassion, and, you know, caringness, but also understand the importance of what the golden rule stands for and put it into action. And I promise you, you won't regret it. So empathy is the word for today, tomorrow, and the days ahead. So thank you for listening to me. If you have any questions for me, I'll be more than happy to answer.
And I'll also make sure that and I see it already happening. The information, if you need it, is already available in the chat for everybody to avail themselves of. Thank you so much, Sarah, for putting that information in there. I see you. Thank you to Dean Chestnut for agreeing to participate and be a part of this. Thank you to Dr. Shabazz and Dr. Chapman as well. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much to Alicia Phillips for being so helpful and so engaging, pretty much being the foundation for this whole thing being created. This was a vision that she and I had, and I'm so happy and thrilled to see what it ultimately has become. To that end, I'll leave you guys with a quote from Maya Angelou. And she says, each one of us has lived through some devastation, some loneliness, some weather superstorm, or spiritual superstorm. When we look at each other, we must say, I understand. I understand how you feel because I've been there myself. We must support each other and empathize with each other, because each of us is more alike than we are unalike. And to that end, I invite everybody to take advantage of the tools that are available in the chat. I invite everybody to take advantage of this recording, which will be posted in TCC on the TCC website for people to take advantage of. If you need help accessing it, you can contact Alicia Phillips or myself. We'll be happy to make sure that you get access to the link. And I'm just so grateful for this opportunity, seeing people come together, talking about how we can be more empathetic to one another and appreciative of one another. And to that end, I'll close it out and wish everybody the best going forward. And be empathetic to yourselves and be empathetic to one another. And we'll see success that way. All right. Thank you all for being a part of this event. Thank you all for being here.